Hi.
Good evening, good day.
Yeah, it's
Mix of
7 o'clock
both.
in Singapore.
Okay.
Yeah.
There are a lot of questions coming in the chat, more and more as time passes by. But I would like to start the Q&A by picking your brain a little bit on something you mentioned at the beginning and at the end of your talk, and we're sort of already chatting about it a little bit backstage, so I want to loop everyone in. I really loved how at the beginning you spoke about the acts of journalism, and I would like you to expand on the definition of it. And the reason I'm asking is because I think a lot of people in the data viz community and the data community overall do things that are data journalism, but since being a data journalist is like such a title that is kind of important and difficult to use, a lot of people who do it are afraid to call themselves data journalists. So would you like to expand a little bit on that?
Yeah. I definitely would not call myself a journalist as well. I work helping journalists a lot, but yeah, it seems like there is this perception that data, like to be a data journalist, means you have to have the whole stack of skills, and because the well-known data journalists are the ones from the New York Times, like people like Mike Bostock, who goes on and like built something like D3. So people still have this sense that to be a data journalist means you really have to do all these things. But I really like the idea of committing acts of journalism, and the definitions that I've come across for journalism vary, but one that I really like is to be a journalist, to commit an act of journalism is to take something important and make it interesting. And I feel like that's what people in data viz do every day. And anytime you're doing that, you're effectively committing an act of journalism. And just if you go to Twitter and click on hashtag DataFan, that's a lot of stuff that's already out there. So I think for kind of to make it more journalistic, I think honing what you think of as important and what really can is something that really connects with an audience, and this is something that's really important. I really want to take this thing that people might not really understand and make it interesting so that people will pay attention to it. I think that makes it into something that you call journalism. Yeah.
I love it. And someone in the chat is mentioning that it relates to the talk we had from Emre yesterday. I don't know if you got the chance to watch it, on making the significant interesting with data visualization and journalism. Okay, for some reason time is flying by, so I'm just gonna jump right into the other questions. So how did you go from being a freelancer to building your own team?
Yeah, it definitely was by accident. We in the on conference yesterday about building your data viz business. I think this came up as well, and it for a lot of people who kind of started teams, I think it was quite organic. You kind of start getting more clients who are asking to do more work, and at first you go from just being a freelancer to kind of having a little collective that your friends who work on similar things that you keep working along, and then I think for me particularly, it was we got one project that the client particularly wanted to work with a team, because it was like we don't want just to work with a collective of people who are loosely together. We just want to work with a team. So that's when I got in touch with people who I had already been working with, and got them together and say, hey, we have like a long, like 1 year project. Let's work together. And that's how I got into working as a team. And then it for the last 3 years is kind of has evolved like that.
Okay, fun. What are some of your tips for data journalism practitioners to help expand the field and train others, especially in countries where data journalism is still minimal?
Mhm. Yeah, so I think it's important to reach out to spaces and places who are not familiar with data and not familiar with data viz, right? So today, I would say if you talk to an editor in a newsroom, they will have heard of data viz before. They will have looked at really good data journalism examples before. But especially in Southeast Asia and the global South in general, they will still feel like it's something that's way beyond their reach. So kind of having you as a data viz professional kind of sit down with someone who is kind of interested in it and is in the position of power to kind of like take their organization along and kind of just sit down and talk to them and kind of engage their interests and explain it to them in a way that doesn't talk down to them and really gets them to engage more and really convince them that this is something doable in their newsroom. I think it's one of the most effective ways that I've seen.
And a follow-up question to that is, do you usually reach out to editors, or would they reach out to you?
I think in the beginning, when you have to be a bit of a cheerleader. If you're like, say, one of the first few people in your country who are kind of like geeking out and just doing this kind of thing, you really have to, go to the meetups. If there's like a unconference type thing, like sign up and give a talk about that. And maybe you know some journalists, you can kind of write a guest column. That's how I first started kind of. If you write a guest column, and then you will get to know the editor a bit more, and then that's when you get to sit down with them. And so once you have a few pieces out, then I think people will start seeing your byline and contact you instead, I think. But all you need is like that one chance to kind of talk to someone who is in an editorial position, and I think that's how you get the ball rolling.
So the first step is the scariest, and then after that,
for sure.
It should be okay. So, in your experience, how did journalists have to change their approach in finding story angles when they switch from the usual way of interviewing people to interviewing data? And I really love this idea of interviewing data.
Yeah, I feel like it's a big switch for most journalists who are used to doing things in a traditional way. I feel like for younger journalists who just got into the field, the switch is easier for them because they're not so kind of settled on working on a certain way of doing things. I feel like journalists, when they write about a certain topic, they are quite reluctant to kind of say, I made some calculations, and this is the claim that I made from, like, these are the sources that I use, and this is the claim I made. It's always, they feel it's easier for them to say, put a quotation mark and say, this human being said this, is not me, so I'm being objective. But when you're doing data journalism, you're kind of doing interviewing too, but the interviewing is of course, something. It could be just doing some calculations in a spreadsheet, or it could be something like running a statistical model. But I feel like getting past that thing of even when you're just interviewing people, you're still kind of driving the conclusions that you want to get to. There's still a mental model in your head about the situation that you want to explain. So even when you're just interviewing people and putting their quotes in quotation marks, you're still kind of doing some analysis, right? So I think that's the approach I use to kind of get them to come over this mental block of just because you did some analysis and it feels like you're doing something that the expert person should be doing. It's okay, and especially if you're publishing the methodology and someone else can go and check and say, here's the data source, here's what I did with it, and it's that's how I get them to, yeah.
These are all amazing tips. This morning we were joking about someone saying that all of these sessions at Outlier were sort of group therapy, and I think people who are struggling with the questions that they're asking you can probably totally relate. Okay, we still have 5 minutes left. Let's see how many questions I can still ask you. Do you feel support for open data and civic tech is uniform throughout society, or are there instances where you have to persuade people if it's important in their first place, and how do you do it?
Yeah, it's definitely not uniform. Like for a lot of organizations, they are not used to being transparent with their data. So if you, or they might be transparent with the data in certain ways, but for data that can kind of come back and bite them, they'll be like, well, we won't share this data, but this data that makes us look good, we're very, very happy to share it. And for civic tech, for me personally, I'm from Myanmar, and what kind of got me into civic tech was seeing a hackathon happening in Indonesia for their elections, where people kind of built all kinds of apps to kind of make the elections more transparent. and we got a chance to take that model and apply it to Myanmar. And just seeing the enthusiasm of the community kind of come together and take open data and create things out of it that really help people understand, how elections work, especially in my country where like nobody has done elections before. That was really powerful, and that got me hooked into civic tech and open data.
Amazing. A very important question coming after this one. Regarding working with civil society organizations and NGOs who collect data, have you encountered issues with protecting privacy of those included in the data? And if yes, how do you tackle this challenge?
Yeah. So I don't know if this interview, the Q&A part is going to be live on YouTube, but right now in Myanmar, this is for people working with data. It's a huge issue because people's lives are at risk in my country right now, and we really have to be. I'm scared all the time. Like I'm scared of making some mistake in terms of like something like not deleting a column on your Excel sheet before you hit publish can really have life or death consequences. So taking your time, because there's always when you're publishing open data, when you're doing data journalism, there's always this kind of like time pressure to have something published that's newsworthy and relevant. But also you really have to not rush and have a checklist that you go through. Of course, there's like standard techniques for anonymization, kind of like you don't publish your names, addresses, or ways that you can kind of like triangulate two pieces of data and put it together. But yeah, I'm always terrified that I'll do something wrong and I'll release some piece of data that could violate someone's safety. So
Yeah, those are such important questions. Do you have a checklist since you spoke about it, or is it just sort of the top of your head, or do you write it down? How do you go about it?
I don't have a standard checklist. It depends. So definitely, you don't want information that you can so for example, geographic locations. You don't want information to be able to identify someone by the address. If it's even aggregated information, if you're talking about like a very minority population where you talk about someone from a certain ethnic group, you say like 5 people in this neighborhood or something, and if that's a small enough sample that people can kind of infer from there, that's also so. It's not just the disaggregated data that you have to be careful about. Even when you're aggregating it, you have to be careful, like what are the counts, and especially if the counts are very small, and people can infer from that data that you publish to like individual privacy measures, and then that can be quite dangerous.
That's really helpful. Thank you so much. Naomi backstage with me says that the chat is blowing up, but the bad news is that we have to go to break now. So unfortunately, I cannot ask you any more questions. However, if you have time, I really, really encourage you to answer the questions in the talk notes. And I know you plan to add your slides in there. So for everyone interested in this conversation, go there and maybe Jan will answer all your questions. So feel free to add more. This has been super interesting. Thanks so much for joining us. And I hope to see you around during the rest of the talks.
Thanks.